All right. Can you guys hear me okay? Awesome. Here we go. All right. My name is Jason Haddix, and I am the CISO and hacker in charge at a company called BuddoBot, which does red teaming and adversarial simulation and emulation. So, but I also spent many years doing web hacking and mobile hacking, and I spent 5 years of my life doing bug bounty hunting like Ben. So Ben and I run in a lot of the same circles, do a lot of the same stuff. And so I've had this wonderful opportunity to kind of see the industry from a lot of sides. On the offensive security side, I also have seen it from a defensive side. So I've been the CISO at Ubisoft, a video game company. I have been the subject of some of the apps that APTs that Lena was talking about this morning, or the target. And so I kind of wanted to bring together a talk that brought together my reconnaissance and my thoughts around how I see modern day adversaries using reconnaissance to attack organizations. And so we're going to jump into a little bit of that today. Well, that doesn't look right, but that's okay. So the first thing we're going to talk about is adversary operations. So this is a graph from a CISO report that came out this year, and it talks about initial access of adversaries. And if you look at this graph, I know the text is a little tiny. Really, the biggest chunks of this pie graph and initial access techniques that happen, at least via this survey, is valid accounts being stolen and spear phishing. And it really sucks because this is not a lot of what, like Tim was talking about yesterday, right? He was talking about some like badass initial access methods and like pivoting. And, some people are talking about binary exploitation here, but it is my firm belief that actually hackers are very opportunistic, and they will take the path of least resistance in almost every case. So we're going to talk about how I see the levels of APTs and adversaries kind of working in the wild. This is another key trends report by Kaspersky, initial access vectors. So you can see here that exploiting public-facing apps, and most of these are web apps in 2022, and then compromised accounts and malicious email, which means phishing. And so again, these are things I'm going to bring up during kind of the talk a little bit. So like I said, adversaries are opportunists, and they're very pragmatic. And in my mind, and having a little bit of experience, growing up kind of on the dark web, this is very true. And so this is the mental model that I think that most people run through. So I made this yesterday. Spacing's not great. Marketing could have done some fix up on the graphics. But if you think about like video game levels, right, or levels of initial access or credential compromise, this is how I break down adversaries flow in my head. So at level 1, your typical adversary will do the easiest possible thing, and they will go to look for pre-owned machines for your organization. And that means that they go through PACE, they go through breach dumps. And so a lot of red teamers are very familiar with this part of kind of threat intel and credential hunting, right? This hardly ever works. I mean, like if you're getting something from Dehashed or something, or hate mail, one of those APIs that you can subscribe to, very few of the credentials that you find in those dumps work. So that's why it's in level 1. Then level 2 is you're still looking for pre-owned machines as an adversary. So now you're going into the dark web forum ecosystem. And this is things like Russian market. It used to be Genesis market. Some new markets are popping up to replace Genesis now. And these are sites selling credentials and cookies for machines. And so you go search through these dumps and you see, if you work at Slack, right? You work at the corporation Slack. Oh, I see like a Slack domain email address. It's in this dump. I'm going to buy that dump and try to use it for initial access. Then you have level 3. So if you can't do that, level 3 is working with the ransomware as a service marketplace. So before, there is a little step before someone like Lockbit releases the data dump on the internet, because the company doesn't pay a ransom, they will actually offer to pre-sale it to a whole bunch of hackers through the forum ecosystem. They want to make some money off of it. They don't just want to dump it and burn it because they put all that work into it or they purchased it. And so you can attempt to, through intermediaries in the next level, buy the Lockbit data or the ransomware as a service data and get credentials to basically get initial access to your target. Now, level 4 is the kind of the hardest one to do because it's the private kind of ecosystem of WhatsApp, Telegram, and Discord. And this is where a lot of stealer logs get stolen. Do you guys know what stealer logs are? Any of you guys? Okay. Stealer logs are basically the dumps of basically credential stealer malware, right? So drive-by malware, whole bunch of stuff like Redline, stuff like that. And so when those people do their campaigns, they're basically putting out a wide net to basically compromise a whole bunch of people. And then they sift through their data and they sell it in these giant dumps. And then what they do is they go to WhatsApp or Telegram or Discord and they advertise, hey, I have this dump. Here's the list of email addresses that I have associated to accounts, and I have these cookies for these email addresses for these websites, and you can buy it. And so this is the hardest one to infiltrate as a good guy, because to get access to these Telegram channels, these WhatsApp channels, and these Discord channels, you have to be a bad guy, and you have to be vouched for, and there's a whole system to get into them. Now, there are some methods of getting into these places, and so it gets into kind of the threat intel world, and I won't burn the tradecraft here. If you want to talk to me about like how, in a red team engagement, you can get to this level and emulate real bad guys, come talk to me, and we'll talk about it next. So that's level 4. What is level 5? This is the part where we actually get to exploit things. So the hacker then, the adversary then will look at web known days, I call them, right? And so these are basically exploits that we have, or basically vulnerabilities that we have an exploit for, usually web vulnerabilities. So infrastructure websites or infrastructure web apps that control different things like firewalls and stuff like that. They'll look for those for an organization. And then in level 6, then comes the phishing. Only at this point will they risk actually touching your stuff, like really interacting with you at level 5 and level 6. So custom phish campaigns, which they will either do man-in-the-middle phishing, which is more prevalent these days for spear phishing attacks, or file-based attacks, which Tim actually had a really good graphic yesterday of the ones that work these days via file phishing and ones that don't work these days. Then in level 7, you get to basically real exploit development. So we are 7 levels deep until an adversary will actually attempt to build a custom exploit for you. And they will normally do the patch reversing cycle first. So they will look at infrastructure that you have, they will profile you, and then they will reverse engineer some patches for some vulnerabilities that maybe came out that were unknown. Then you have 0 day, and this is the top tier adversaries, right? But even the top tier adversaries that I've seen will go through all these levels. They don't start at tier 8. They don't sit down at their job and be like, man, I'm going to really write a 0 day today, right? Like maybe a couple do, but at level 8, they're like, okay, well, none of these other methods have worked. Now I'm going to try to do an unknown exploit for software that this company uses. And then level 9, if they really want to get into your stuff, it's insider threat and corporate espionage. They will pay someone to get hired at your organization. All right. So on the right-hand side of this, I have put like basically what the skill set for a red teamer is to emulate an actual bad guy, because that's what we want to do. I find that a lot of red teams, pen testers, offensive security people really live in levels 5, 6, and 7, and 8. They really care about these levels. But in the previous slide, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that attackers will do that probably not a lot of you are doing. At least I don't see many red teams doing a great job. So my talk today is about the process of finding different, or basically canvassing an organization for all of their websites, basically. And it's reconnaissance. And so we're going to talk about recon methods I use and some other stuff. So recon is a giant topic. So I teach a 2-day class of just reconnaissance for adversaries and pen testers and bug bounty hunters. And so these are all the subcomponents of what I think holistic reconnaissance looks like and some initial access topics. Here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to cover Showdown, cloud enumeration, which Ben talked about a little bit. We're going to cover scraping for subdomains, and we're going to cover GitHub Reconnaissance. All right, so let's talk about what we're after. So when I'm an adversary, a bug bounty hunter, or a pen tester on a wide scope engagement, which I guess technically makes me a red teamer, definitions vary. But I am after apex domains, subdomains, IP addresses, services, and contextual business and tech intel. These are the things I want to gather about my target. So here you can see twitch.tv is our apex domain. Our subdomain is www. And then obviously you guys know what IP addresses and services are. Why are we after finding as many subdomains? Ben alluded to this in his talk about Recon. Why are we after finding subdomains? Well, for every subdomain that you find, you 2x your chance of hacking your target. For every apex domain that you find, every new domain, so let's say twitch.tv is the main apex domain, and then you find Twitch svc.tv, and that's another apex domain, you 4x your chance of attacking your, basically finding a vulnerability in your target, hacking your target. So this is why Recon is so important to red teamers. And it's really great to have seen the marriage of bug bounty and building tool sets that red teamers now use in this type of wide scope recon. And that started to happen in the last couple of years. I'm going to talk about some of these tools today. One thing, Recon is a cycle. It jumps around. And this is actually why it stymies people a lot. They don't like it. So when you do Recon, you can be in like a third, fourth, or fifth phase of Recon. And then you can find a new apex domain somehow. And then you got to go back to the beginning and enumerate that apex domain. And that can go on for a long time, especially if you're attacking a big organization. I'm on a campaign right now where we're hacking an organization, and we took a week to do full Recon, and we found 6,000 web domains. And it's a lot of data, and it took a lot of jumping around, and I have automation to do it, so it helps me. But you know, it is not for the faint of heart. It's a lot of data parsing, you know, so it's not a linear process, but it does pay off. So usually you have like a lot of tools and people who will do Recon, and they'll do like this 90% here. And in my experience in red teaming, and I've been doing offensive security for longer than I want to say, probably 15, 20 years now, most people do the 90%. The extra 10% that I'm going to talk about a little bit is where you actually win. Recon wins engagements. Good Recon wins engagements. That's all I'll say. Okay, so where do we start in reconnaissance? When we get given a campaign or a wide scope bug bounty, where do we start? Well, we start with the company's ASN. If they're big enough to have been assigned an ASN, finding someone's ASN will give us the IP addresses of owned infrastructure and servers of this company. If you don't know what an ASN is, it's called an autonomous system number. It's a designation for a group of IP addresses that a company owns, an entity. So this will lead us to more apex domains, more websites, and more services. So how do we find a company's ASN? Well, my favorite method is to use Hurricane Electric. So Hurricane Electric is at bgp.he.net, and you go there and they have a free text search box. And in there, you can just put the name of your target. So here we have Twitch. I've just put a free text search. And here you can see that in the description field came back Twitch Interactive, and that's the company's name. And then there are their two autonomous system numbers. So AS46489 and 307153. Now, when you drill down into this, you'll get their IP addresses. So you'll drill down into that page, and then eventually in my notes, I'll just put, okay, here are the IP addresses that are owned infrastructure for this company. And this is the first step in hacking them. So I have the IP addresses of their owned infrastructure, but many people are hybrid cloud these days, right? So like they have a lot of like cloud servers that are not mentioned in the ASNs. And so we'll get to how to profile a company's cloud servers in a second. Ben alluded to a lot in his talk. Another way that you can get the IP information is from the registrars like Aaron and Ripe. You can grab basically IP information from there using free text search on the websites. And then once you get that, you do want to do a quick port scan. And so this is a hot topic for like pen testers and stuff like that. I actually prefer, you know, like people are like, what is the fastest port scanner? Like, you know, what is the most extensible port scanner? It's always been a hot topic. Nmap, like, you know, pen testers really love Nmap. Old school red teamers really love Nmap. Nabu is actually my preferred port scanner these days. It's fast, it's extensible, and you can pass it verbatim ASN numbers, and it will extrapolate out the IP addresses and then scan them for ports. So Nabu is probably my favorite right now. It is not the fastest, but is the most extensible and fastest that it is extensible. Okay, so this is the one for red teamers, right? So like you kind of want to stay stealthy. Well, a lot of red teamers want to care stealthy. I care less about that, honestly. But so you want to stay stealthy. You don't want to burn yourself to your client, right? So a new tool that has come out really recently is SMAP. And SMAP, what it'll do is it'll do a port scan, but basically it'll look for stuff on Showdown. So you supply this tool with your Showdown API key, and then you give it your ranges like we had on the last page, and it will do a port scan based off the Showdown historical data and tell you what ports are open. So this is a completely passive tool, and that way you don't ever touch your client, and you can go ahead and grab their port information. So when we do the first phase of all this stuff, we use SMAP, and then later on when we want to get intrusive and actually touch people, we'll use Nabu. Okay, so I've gotten some IP ranges. I've gotten some maybe domains, some ports information for our target. Now, one of the things is I want to continue to try to collect as many Apex domains as I can. One of the really great ways to do this is to interrogate a company's auto-discover situation in Microsoft. So there is an API that exists, the auto-discover service in Microsoft Exchange, for you to set up a new mail service. And it exists on an API endpoint that Microsoft owns. And you can query it with this script called checkMDI. So checkMDI will basically take any domain you already know about. Here we're looking at Tesla.com. And then it'll query the auto-discover service and say, here are the other things in their tenants. And it'll also tell you if an MDI instance was turned on for them. So here we can see that Tesla has Tesla.com, TeslaMotors.com, Perbix, Tesla.services. You can see a subdomain there, service.tesla.com, c.tesla.com, whole bunch of subdomains. Cylon, which is an old acquisition of theirs. Solar City, which is their solar company. And then, yeah, and so, and Tesla Grumman Engineering, which was an engineering place that they focused on. I've hacked a lot on Tesla. So this script is really dope to give you a new list of Apex domains. Remember, I said it's circular, so now we have to go back and enumerate these at some point. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about Showdown. So what will Showdown give us in reconnaissance? Showdown will give us passive subdomains, IP address stuff, vulnerability data, and more. So if you want to get really good at Showdown, this is the best manual cheat sheet I found. There's a link in the slides at the bottom, but it has all of the query operators for the Showdown search box. And these are kind of what you'll build. You'll do like your manual Showdowning with if you're using the web front end. Most people use Showdown through the command line or the command line tool that they offer, but I'm going to show some other stuff too. So if you want to get really in depth with Showdown hacking, which is a whole art in itself, it's like what Google hacking used to be, except for just querying Showdown's data. You can use this cheat sheet to kind of help you out. If you don't know what Showdown is, it's an infrastructure spider. It crawls the internet. It pulls back every page's IP address, certificate information, title, it tags their geolocation of where the server is located. It's just an infrastructure spider that runs all the time. Okay, so this is kind of what it looks like when you use the web interface. You can just search twitch.tv. I could have done org Twitch or something like that. And then you get a whole bunch of data back with, here's everything I've seen for anything that says twitch.tv. And so I can start reading through this and getting hints about some other stuff. So when I look at this page after just doing a simple search, I can see that they're using Fastly. I can see that they have Amazon has a subdomain that references Twitch, which makes sense because Amazon eventually acquired Twitch. So this gives me like some clues. But this is actually not how I use Showdown in a red team engagement. I use Karma. Has anyone in here used Karma before? No. Oh, yes. Very good. Okay. So Karma is an automated Showdown query tool. So it'll go out and query the Showdown database for very specific things. And it's really valuable in kind of the red teaming world. There's another tool too called WTFIS. But this is kind of what Karma looks like. So what you do is you feed your Apex domain into Karma, and it'll go look at Showdown. And then it'll come back with all this interesting information. It's like, okay, so here are all the hosts I found. Here's all the ones that have SSL enabled. Here are all the SSL host names and title names. Here are all the directories that came up that were forbidden. Here's all the ones that had weird statuses. And then at the end, you get some really interesting kind of vulnerability signatures or things to check. And so you can see, hey, I found a Jetty Direct page. I found a Grafana page. I found a MongoDB server. I found a Spring Boot, which Ben was talking about in his last talk. And so this is completely passive. I haven't touched my client at all at this point. So you can run this tool and get a whole bunch of really valuable vulnerability data from Showdown before you even touch your target. Now, it has a built-in repository of checks in Karma, but the checks are actually really easy to make in the signature file. So you can create signatures of your own in Karma, which I have done for a whole bunch of stuff. This is very simple, you know, like finding PHP MyInfo, finding pages that have index on, like all this stuff. But you can make some really complex queries, and it's the same syntax that you use in that cheat sheet in the first slide. And so you just add them to a line in this file, and then they become checks in the tool when you run it. And so I have like, you know, like almost 400 quick hits of things I'm interested in when I attack an organization, when I scan using Karma into Showdown's database. If you're just looking to find subdomains from Showdown, you can use ShowSubGo, which is my preferred tool. I think it's stable. It just gives me what I want. And what this will do is it'll go to Showdown and just find you the subdomains for a target. So here's uber.com, running it on there, and you can see that it went through all of Showdown's data and says, here's all the subdomains for uber.com. The question is here, there are other tools that include the ability to use Showdown as part of them, which is Amass, right? And the thing I find in hacker tooling is that I'm a real big proponent in when open source tooling gets made for one thing, and that tool author is very laser focused on that one thing. And they're really good at building this. And I find that when I run ShowSubGo, it finds more than the Amass module to find the same stuff. So that's why I mentioned it verbatim in the presentation. We also have Ben, who's done a fantastic asset discovery video for Showdown. And he goes over using the Showdown CLI binary. So there's a link in here that you can use. He's got a whole bunch of parsing tips. He's also demoing a couple other tools in there too, like HTTPX. So this one I recommend for people to go watch. Lastly, if you want to get deep and dirty into vulnerability checks, querying the Showdown database, these are the best resources that you can look into. So the official Showdown documentation, the pen testing guide for Showdown, and there's a couple sites that basically house vulnerability checks via Showdown search query syntax. And so if you just want to check these out at your leisure, you can do that. So all of this stuff we've gotten, you know, probably more subdomains, maybe a couple Apex domains. We might have some stuff to look at in the vulnerability area, in the vulnerability, you know, kind of area, and then now we can move on to basically checking our organization's cloud infrastructure. So this is actually a black box for a lot of people. How do you know all the servers that your organization has in the cloud? And the answer is not simple. There's no simple way to query that. The basic way that we do it in Bug Bounty, and I'm pretty sure Bug Bounty did most of this tooling to start with, was doing cloud reconnaissance via certificates. And so Ben talked a little bit about this, but I'm going to dive real deep into it. So what are we after? We will be looking at SSL certificates to find subdomains of our targets or apex domains of our targets, and sometimes internal domain names of our targets. How do we do this? Well, we look at certs. So an SSL cert has multiple fields. And inside of the fields, you can have the common name, the organization name, and the subject alt name. And every one of these fields can have a list of your target's subdomains. And then you can visit them and see what's on those sites. Now, how do we get the certs? Well, you scan the whole internet. So my friend Gunnar and I built a tool at DEF CON. We released it at DEF CON. And we built a tool that will basically scan any range. So it can be an internal range, it can be an external range, whatever, and it'll visit the IP address that you specify and just grab the subject, all those fields basically I mentioned in the last slide. And so you can run this. And the thing that's special about our tool is I can run the entire set of cloud ranges. AWS, GCP, Azure, I can run it in 2 hours. I can scan their entire ranges. And then I can grep that data and filter for here I'm looking for MGM resorts. And so I can grep the data, which is just a text file, and it tells me everything that has MGM resorts in the certificate field of the whole cloud range. So here you can see some of their subdomains, and you do this for each Apex domain you have for your client. Now, how do I get the whole ranges for Amazon GCP? Well, there's a great GitHub repository by Lord Alfred at the bottom of the page. It basically has this file called IPv4 merged, and it's basically all of the cloud ranges that you can need. So you pass that to our tool. So to run this over the cloud, 2 hours on a pretty normal DigitalOcean box, like a $40 DigitalOcean box. To run this over the whole IPv4 space takes about 2 days. So if you run 2 concurrent boxes, you can get a current scan of the entire internet's cloud infrastructure, excuse me, every day, delivered to your inbox. And then you can grep it and be like, okay, my client has a new site they spun up, as long as they attach an SSL certificate and reference their name. So Cloud Recon, super powerful. A backup for Cloud Recon is a site called kforjaeger.gay. They are a hacker collective, I think based out of Sweden or Germany, I can't remember. And they do the same idea, but they just dump the files onto a website. But they do it every 2 or 3 weeks, so it's not as fresh as doing it on your own every day. But if you just need a quick download, you can go to their site, the link's right there, and you can grab the text files for each of the cloud providers, and it will have the same data that we're kind of doing too. So it's a backup. Okay, when you do get the K4Jaeger data, here's a really ugly bash command to parse it down to what you need. If you're interested, you can just grab it from the slide later. Okay, so the next session, man, the spacing got messed up on these slides. That sucks. Okay, so the next section is subdomain scraping, and this will by far be the biggest contributor to you finding out what your target has online. So the general idea here is you're going out to, well, a whole bunch of sites on the internet parse data about URLs, right? And so you're trying to go to all these sites, like these internet infrastructure sources, these search engines, certificate sources, and then like even security companies collect data about URLs. And you're trying to go to all of them and either scrape or ask their APIs, what do you know about the company I'm trying to hack? So Tesla, Twitch, whatever you want to do, right? And so before this, we had to, in the pen tester world, had to rely on brute forcing, which took a long time, and it really sucked. You can remember the days of like Fierce and some of those tools and stuff. And so we were lucky in kind of the bug bounty era to come out with Sublister, which was the first tool to do this, to go out to all these sources and scrape them and pull down all the references. But now we have some really advanced ones that we can use. This is the idea of doing it for Google, right? So the way that you would do subdomain enumeration just through Google search would be to search site.twitch.tv and see what comes back with that search. And then, okay, so I know about www, so let's minus out www. Okay, so now I did that search and I know that watch, I know about watch, so let's minus out watch. And we just keep on iteratively minusing out the ones that we know about until we know of every subdomain that Google has ever seen about Twitch. So this is the idea to do it with Google, but a lot of these tools, we can do it automated with a command line script. So the first one that a lot of people use is Amass. So Amass is written by Jeff Foley, and it parses a whole bunch of sources from the internet and brings back all of their subdomain data for you to grab. Now, I am showing the old version of Amass here, and basically they have gone through a new update to Amass 4, I think, and it works a little bit differently, but same idea. You can pull back all of the subdomains for your target. So it also gives you a great table, which is really useful to understand your target's infrastructure. So it goes out to all these sources, and it's like, okay, I pulled down from VirusTotal, there was some strings in this binary that said that your customer had this thing, this subdomain. Then it'll take that subdomain and resolve it, and it will tell you kind of a bird's eye view of your client of where most of their infrastructure is. So here you can see that this is Twitch, the output of Twitch, and they're mostly hosted in Amazon O2, ASN 16509. And so this gives you a very bird's eye view of kind of like how their whole infrastructure works, because you're reversing all of those domain names back to areas on the internet. The other tool in scraping is Subfinder. Subfinder is written by Project Discovery, same company that does Nabu, the port scanner. They release actually a whole bunch of tools that, I think that the work that Project Discovery has done has not been, like rivaled basically since the days when we got Nmap. So Project Discovery, if you haven't checked out their whole tool set, it's amazing. They do nuclei and a whole bunch of stuff. Okay, so Subfinder is the other tool that can do this. Between Subfinder and Amass, I use them both because they have a couple different sources. And so subdomain scraping with Subfinder is much faster. They focus on just a few sources and bring back information faster. Amass takes longer to run, but is more comprehensive. So I use them both, and then I concatenate the output and then unique it. A new entry in this field is a tool called BuddoBot, and it works much the same, but it's a whole framework for reconnaissance and OSINT rather than just finding subdomains. But when I benchmarked this against other tools recently on an engagement, I found that BuddoBot, after I had run Amass and Subfinder, and then compared it to the output of BuddoBot found 5% more domains than basically the other two did. So I have rolled it into my assessment process or my recon process. If you want just the output names of the DNS, here's a bad bash command as well to do it. All right. So these tools, they go out to all these sites, and they scrape all these sites or they pull whatever back. But the thing is that some of these sites that they have built into them require basically an API key. You need to get an API key to use these APIs to pull data from them. So by default, you can look at Amass and say, which ones are you doing right now? Is it available? It has a little star next to it in its table. Which places are you parsing? And you can see here, by default, it'll do active DNS, alien vault, AskDNS, like whatever. It tells you the method for how it's pulling data from that site about your target, et cetera. But you can see a whole bunch of other ones which are not enabled. And so this is really where you can get your value in some of these tools. So what APIs do you register to that are free that give you back better and more data? The first one is Project Discovery, Project Discovery's chaos database. So Project Discovery, on top of doing the tools and releasing nuclei and Nabu and Subfinder and other ones, they are constantly scanning the internet for subdomains using a lot of the methods that I've talked to today. And they keep it all in a data set that you can register for at chaos.projectdiscovery.io. And then once you register for that, you'll get an API key, and you can either use their command line to query the data set, or you can give these tools that I just talked about in their config files. You can give them your chaos API key, and this is what you need to do. So the difference between doing recon with these scraping tools without chaos and then with chaos is about a 20% increase of finding hosts. So this is a really powerful data set, is the chaos discovery. One thing that people think about this data set is because the company Project Discovery is known for their work in the bug bounty community, and on the front page, they have this table of all of the bug bounties where you can grab just all their fresh domains. People erroneously think that they're only scanning companies that have bug bounties. That is not the truth. They're scanning the entire internet. So it's really behooving to use that source. The next one is GitHub. So you can parse GitHub as a source, but you need tokens to do that. You need authentication tokens to parse the search API. So you can register a burner GitHub account, generate a token, and then you can grab them, and you need to generate a few because the GitHub search API has like a lot of weird rate limiting associated with it. And then you can add it to different tools that we've mentioned before, and it will go out and parse GitHub for you. These are the rest that are free that are kind of secondary. I think GitHub and the Project Discovery chaos data set are the best ones. But you can also grab Facebook API keys. You can grab passive total from RiskIQ and Showdown as well. And you can put them all in your Amass config file or your Subfinder config file, and this will drastically increase your reconnaissance capability. There are some paid sources as well that do really great things. So Rapid7 used to run this thing called Sonar. It's pretty much depreciated at this point, so forget that. Security Trails is by far one of the most comprehensive domain data sets that exists on the internet that is a paid source, but they're kind of expensive. So you have to have the budget to buy that API key. And then Spiderfoot, I would say, is like the second best paid source, which they got acquired recently by Intel 471, I think. And you have to like find a special email to get access to Spiderfoot, but Spiderfoot is a really good data set as well. Recently, when teaching my reconnaissance class, a student told me about Netlist. So Netlist is kind of the new hotness. Netlist is affordably priced, great data set, is scanning all these sources constantly, and you can plug it in with an API key to a lot of the tools now. So Netlist is kind of the new hotness in this area. All right, last place. I'm going to burn through this real quick because I'm out of time. GitHub Enumeration. All right, so most tools inside of GitHub parsing are looking for secrets in GitHub, and they're looking for you to point them at a repository to get secrets out of or get domain information. That is actually the opposite of what we want as reconnaissance people. We want to look at all of GitHub and find out where our target is referenced, those code snippets, because developers often use their personal accounts to work with work code, either on purpose or by accident. And so we're going to use some tools to enumerate our target. The first one is Get Subdomains by Gwendolyn Kuit. And this tool basically take a Apex domain. Here I have Dell, and it will go through. You have to feed it with your GitHub tokens, like I talked in the last slide about. You feed it with 3 tokens, which I have blurred out. And then it'll basically search all of GitHub for references to Dell.com. And it'll tell you every repo that has a reference in its code to Dell.com. So the first thing this does is it gives you a giant list of subdomains, which is awesome because some of these things you will not find anywhere else. Then like, some developer thought it was like, cool to reference it as a variable in his bash history or like, as an alias, and then accidentally put it up on GitHub, but it's an internal host. So wealth of information got GitHub. Not only do you get the subdomains that it puts here, it outputs it as a better file. This is just the iterative run. You also get the link to the repository, and often you can see or the actual piece of source code where it was referenced in. And you can look and see those names and be like, oh, like config.something or whatever. I have found so many bounties by just like exploring GitHub repos where my clients were referenced inside some of these files. So you can do this all manually as well. But I have a script here if you want to grab it. It basically uses, it's basically a bash script that prints out links to things you want to check via GitHub. And so it prints out a link and you just paste that into your browser. In my terminal, I can actually just control click, and then it will open up the search for what you're looking for. So I know this is hard to see, but there's stuff like password, nprc.auth, Docker config, IDSRA, IDRSA. Basically, all of these files or references to variables or function names that could be super sensitive. And so we search for that keyword and then our client's domain. And then you can start to get back some really valuable vulnerability data. These type of things, this GitHub enumeration, this GitHub dorking is amazing for finding vulnerabilities. You can also get TLDs out of this. You can get host name patterns. You can basically use it for research into the stack that your client uses, like what kind of DBMSs are they using, what OSS components are they using, all kinds of stuff. All right, that's all I got for today. If you want to know more about hardcore recon, let me know. I got a whole deck about it. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let's take a couple quick questions and then we'll move to our lunch break. And if you have additional questions for Jason, well, if you're here in person, he's here, or online, you can post that up in Discord. One really easy one. What's the name of your 2-day course?
It's called the Bug Hunters Methodology Live, TBHM live.com.
Yeah. Nice. So here's a technical question. During scanning, how do you combat with a ticket abuse later by the companies or IP address you scan? Does proxy use help, and whether the scan results are the same with and without the proxy?
So, I mean, I think they're talking about kind of getting banned by either DNS providers or your scanning box, like I use DigitalOcean. To be honest, I have never been banned from DigitalOcean doing this at an appropriate kind of rate. Even my cloud scraping tools have never got me banned from DigitalOcean. But if you really care about getting banned or something like that, you can use frameworks like Shadow Clone and Axiom to distribute your scans via multiple VPSs. So just take the giant list of things you want to do, break it into 12 steps, and scan via 12 servers. And so that would be how you would approach that.
Great, awesome. Well, lots of questions about links for things that you were talking about. I guess
Everything should be hyperlinked in the
Yeah,
presentation. So.
sweet. All right, well, let's take our lunch break and we will start back up at 1 p.m. with a talk from Connor McGar. Thanks, and another round of applause for Jason.